I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. What school of economics are we all involved with right now? Actually, none. We're only involved in massive banking fraud, and I want Stacy Herbert to come in and give us some details. Stacy.
Well, a crucial element to the banking fraud is accounting fraud and accounting errors. The first headline, Max, oops, the financial crisis was actually just an accounting error. You can all go shopping again. And this is from maxkeiser.com. I wrote the headline.
Excellent job.
And it was referring to two headlines that I noticed. Germany discovers extra $78 billion on major accounting error. And then accounting error trims Irish debt load. So Ireland's finance department has discovered an accounting error that will bring down its national debt by $4.9 billion. The unexpected bonus will trim Ireland's 2000 debt to $197 billion.
This is the shadow banking system, where they do all of the banking deals. It's about the same size as the visible banking system. And depending on the politics of the moment, the banks can add or subtract debt at will, depending on what their political agenda is. Remember, during the 2008 crisis, suddenly Hank Paulson in the U.S. said, oh, there's all kinds of debt about to be unleashed. Give us money. And he put a gun to people's head and he held them hostage. And this is the problem of having a shadow banking system. It gives the bank robbers and the politicians a way to put a gun to people's head. And remarkably, in the United States, they always criticize socialism as the government having a gun to your head. And yet, literally, Goldman Sachs has a gun to America's head, but they call that capitalism.
Well, speaking of terms, one of the things that many heads of corporations or politicians resist is a debt jubilee, even though we've had it for thousands of years. And I thought this was a good way to actually use their own term, something that they're familiar and comfortable with, of accounting fraud, and just use this as a way to get rid of all of our debt problems just by, swapping things around on the ledger.
Right. Well, this is the shadow banking system needs to be reduced, which is the same thing as a debt jubilee. This is something new in the annals of banking scandals. It's only been about 30 years in the whole history of banking that you had the development of the shadow banking system, the dark pools, as they're called, the completely opaque global trading that goes on. The fact that Ireland and Greece or Germany or some other country can announce that they've discovered debt or they adding new debt that they didn't see, it shows you how connected these things are. And at the very top, as we know from a report that just came out recently, the entire banking system is controlled by a very few group of bankers, with Barclays at the very top of the pyramid.
And notice again the word error. It's an accounting error when the top 0.1%, those people who control the entire global financial system, when they commit fraud, it's called an error, just a simple accounting error. When a normal person does it, they end up in jail. Pregnant mom arrested, child taken over $5 shoplifting charge. So this was a woman in Honolulu. She was 7 months pregnant. She was famished, and she ate 2 sandwiches worth $5 in a Safeway supermarket in Honolulu. And she was arrested on shoplifting charges because she forgot to pay, which is exactly an accounting error.
Right, and the error is an interesting word here. When I was working on Wall Street, we had the error account, which is the error account for the office, and every office has an error account, where whenever you break the law and you commit an act of criminality that it results in a loss, you stick that in the error account. And then you work it off through IPO, hot IPOs, for example, this Groupon IPO or any IPO where it's hot, the day one it's up 20 or 30%. They do that on purpose to wipe away the errors in the error account. Now, if you make an error and there's a gain by accident, then of course you keep that immediately. It goes right into your pocket, or the manager or the compliance officer bribes brokers for privilege and privy to that positive error.
Here she has an accounting error that results in her losing her child and being thrown in jail for the night. Here's another accounting error in the news. Hunt for MF Global's missing $700 million. So MF Global is a futures broker headed by John Corzine, the former head of Goldman Sachs, who then went on to be the governor of New Jersey and was in line to replace Timothy Geithner at Treasury. Now, remember, Timothy Geithner also committed a crime by failing to pay his taxes because it was an accounting error. He forgot for 10 years and then went on to head the IRS. So who knows what will happen to John Corzine. But apparently, MF Global commingled its accounts.
Yeah, this is one of the worst things you can do is take your customers' money and just slap it in with a fund with everyone else's money or even your own money. And then when you, again, have losses, then somehow only the customer experiences those losses. But when you have gains, you take all the gains. So instead of just, and people call it socializing the losses and capitalizing on the gains, but it's beyond that. It's just outright commingling of funds, putting a gun to people's heads and stealing their money. I mean, we're getting to the 1930s where it's basically, give us all your money and we're going to send you to the ghetto. And if you complain, we're going to do the final solution and kill you.
Now, Business Insider says that commingling is the regulatory equivalent of a felony offense. But then they continue, there's a basically benign interpretation, which is that MF Global was guilty of nothing more than sloppy bookkeeping.
Right. Well, this is always the excuse. I mean, again, I worked on Wall Street, and there is no law on Wall Street. All the errors accrue to you as gain, and all the losses are distributed to your customers. Occasionally, there's a customer who actually makes money at the end of the year. We call these on Wall Street the gifted client, because no matter how many times you try to kill them, they still end up making money. They're gifted in this sense.
So how John Corzine bankrupted his firm. MF Global has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, making it the first U.S. financial firm to fall victim. John Corzine is a victim, the poor victim of Europe's debt crisis. So he is falling victim to the European debt crisis. It wasn't him leveraging up MF Global and its customer accounts in a wild, reckless bet. On what he did is he bet that big on sovereign debt in Europe, because he was certain that the taxpayer would be forced to bail out all of these debts at 100 cents on the dollar.
That's right. John Corzine is a victim.
He's a victim.
He's a victim. We should all feel bad for him.
But he did drive the 200-year-old firm off the cliff in less than 2 years. For this, he gets a $12 million guaranteed contractual obligation that MF Global must meet. So he gets a $12 million golden parachute, but how did he destroy it? In trying to become what some dubbed a mini Goldman, Corzine's MF Global may have leveraged his bets too much and may not have paid enough attention to risk. So hearing that John Corzine wanted to turn this company into a mini Goldman Sachs, I thought of episode 21 of the Keiser Report. Time for a flashback.
To talk about, among other things, Goldman Sachs. This is quickly becoming the most vilified financial brand in history. Why?
Well, when you're successful, it brings envy and all of those other things that are fairly human. And then when you make an occasional mistake in public.
Mistakes in public, he later then refers to as being these credit default swaps that were sold to Greece.
Yeah, it always comes back to Greece. And look, Papandreou over there in Greece, he's calling for a referendum, and he's throwing the global banking system under the bus, as rightfully he should be.
Yes,
Goldman Sachs needs to be euthanized.
But it comes back again to an accounting error. It's a mistake that Goldman Sachs made that he was referring to, and it's that mistake, the elevation into a holy sort of divinity, where your fraud becomes just a mere mistake, because one can never be evil if one is one of these Goldman Sachs people. So he was hoping that his fraud by stealing MF Global clients' money would just be considered an error, an accounting error.
Well, it's immaculate deception. Let me explain. In other words, Goldman and other banks loan money into existence. There's no collateral for it. They simply loan money to people to do deals, mergers, acquisitions, initial public offerings, and this money comes out of the moneyosphere. There's no basis for it. There's no collateral for it. There's no physical representation of it. Goldman Sachs, because the money is immaculately created from nowhere, they consider themselves above all law. And if they get caught stealing, they simply immaculately create more of this fiat money out of nowhere to bribe whoever it needs. They'll bribe Obama. They'll bribe the Attorney General Eric Holder. They'll bribe the entire Republican and Democratic Party. They immaculately conceive of money from nowhere to bribe anyone they need to do whatever they want with impunity because they're doing God's work.
So accounting error and fraud. John Corzine bankrupted MF Global, a 200-year-old company, by leveraging long-going betting big on Europe. Here's this headline, Max. Selling more insurance on Europe debt raises risk for U.S. banks. Yes, guarantees provided by U.S. lenders on government, bank, and corporate debt in Europe rose by $80.7 billion to $518 billion, according to the Bank for International Settlements. Almost all of these are credit default swaps.
All right, the sellers of this insurance/credit default swap take the premium as cash immediately, and they're never on the hook for any liabilities because they're causing systemic failure. When the system collapses and they say we can't pay out because the system collapsed, well, what about the money you took selling the insurance against systemic collapse? We can't find it. It's with John Corzine. It's in the shadow banking system. Where did it go? It's like Jackie Mason is running the global system. Where did it go? I don't know where it went. There's $700 million. It was here one day and it was here another day. I don't know. You ask me. I just got a bagel. I got a schmear. I don't know where the money went. I don't know. They don't know.
But it all comes back to these Occupy Wall Street protests and all the media, the puppets, the mouthpieces for these bankers, for the Goldman Sachs bankers, say that these protesters are anti-capitalist. Well, time and time again, every single headline we show you, we expose the truth that they are relying, all of these guys, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Dexia, all the people investing in these companies, all the bankers, they expect a taxpayer bailout, that the whole system depends on that.
That ain't no capitalism.
And for that, you need Giabozilla, our artwork here, Max.
Oh, this is a good one, Giabozilla.
That's you, and you're looking angry.
Look, that's you in the background with the big look.
That's you, and you're looking pretty wild and angry there, Max.
Isn't that you in the background? Look at that.
Well, it's certainly my face.
The big 50-foot tall Stacy stalking the globe. Well, Stacy, that's unfortunately all the time we have. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming your way, so stay right there. Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to upstate New York and talk with author, blogger, thinker, all-around swell guy, James Howard Kunstler. James Howard Kunstler, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Hey, Max, you forgot to say that I bake cookies and make my own clothes.
Yeah, I heard you bake your own cookies, and you're putting the Girl Scouts in the community a good run for their money. All right, James, you've been a veteran of the culture wars over the years, and right now the global financial collapse is gathering speed in your travels and from visits to your website, kunstler.com. I get the sense that you sense a great social uprising is happening right now, that this is really not just a flash in the pan, what we're seeing with these Occupy movements, but something bigger. Can you talk on that a little bit?
One of the things that nobody has talked about is what's going to happen in the summer of 2012 when the party conventions are held. And it seems to me that we are going to be facing something that will make the 1968 conventions look like a Labor Day picnic. And the failure of both parties is really sort of bringing us back to something like the late 1850s, when the American political parties lost legitimacy so that they started to disappear. You know, the Whigs were running America for 30 years, going into the mid-1850s, and one day they were just gone because they didn't stand for anything anymore, and nobody believed in them, and they lost their legitimacy, and they're gone virtually overnight. You know, so you're going into the 1860 election, and you know, this new party comes along, the Republican Party. They've already run one candidate in 1856, John C. Fremont, the Western explorer, and he obviously did not win the presidential election. But in 1860, they come up with another guy, you know, Abraham Lincoln, a congressman, from a one-term congressman who came out of nowhere, a railroad lawyer who had won amazing ability. He was able to articulate the terms of the convulsion that the nation was entering into. And I think that we're in a similar situation now as we were the last time that America faced a really great civic convulsion. And that was the period just before the Civil War. So I think we're heading for tremendous political upheaval in the coming year.
All right, you mentioned two periods in American history marked by war, 1860 and the Civil War, which was coming about, and of course 1968, the Vietnam War. Vietnam War in America, the draft resulted in the popular uprising at that time, the youth movement, and the anti-war sentiment. Of course, America doesn't draft anymore people for their wars anymore. They outsource to private contractors and mercenaries like Halliburton. And they get people, however, in the U.S. to pay for this war and to impose austerity measures. So in a lot of ways, you could say that people are being drafted into the poverty, the war against wealth, the continuation of this wealth and income gap. People are being drafted into that. There's a war going on between that 1% versus everybody else. So I guess the comparison you're making is that it is similar to 1968 in that we do have this war going on. It's just an undeclared war.
With all of these epochal, historic predicaments, you get new problems coming along. And the problem that we're facing really is the rule of law in money matters. And we can't seem to reestablish it. And I think it was among the great hopes for change that Mr. Obama represented was that he would reestablish the rule of law on Wall Street and banking and money matters. And he has absolutely failed to get the SEC to enforce the law or to refer cases to the Department of Justice. He's done nothing to reestablish the Glass-Steagall Act. He allowed the Supreme Court decision on Citizens United to just pass by without doing anything to even start a legislative process to redefine what the personhood of a corporation is, because obviously corporations are not people in the way that people do. They don't have rights. They don't have duties, obligations, and responsibilities to the public interest in the same way that people do. And in fact, they're sociopathic. They exist really only to have allegiance to the shareholders and the boards of directors, and that's where it begins and ends. So the idea that they should be able to express themselves freely by corrupting the entire political process by flooding money into the political process is absurd. But more to the point, President Obama did nothing to introduce legislation to redefine what a corporation is or to even start the process of a constitutional amendment to redefine it. He allowed the SEC to destroy 18,000 files of matters under investigation, which could have been used for possible referrals for criminal activity to the SEC. The Dodd-Frank FinReg legislation is a joke. It really didn't even include any regulation. That was all left until after the bill was passed and for the bankster lobbyists to go in and actually write the rules, which is what they've been doing for the last 18 months, and that's absurd. So, he's done nothing to deconstruct the too big to fail banks and make them smaller and make them less dangerous to the systemic integrity of the financial system. So I think that, these failures are just so monumental that they really invite a third party. And I heard something interesting the other night. I was at a conference in Virginia, and I was talking to a guy who was a political operative for Howard Dean. I told him I'd heard a podcast in which Larry Kotlikoff, the Boston University economist, one of the only economists in the whole USA who has a credible idea about anything, had been talking about advising a possible third party candidate. And I was wondering if it was actually Howard Dean, because he's kind of stepped out of the picture for the last 4 or 5 months. But it's beginning to look like it may actually be Michael Bloomberg. And Michael Bloomberg is very quietly going around hiring people, including a lot of people who worked in the Hillary Clinton campaign. And he's a political independent now. And, I think that there may be a possibility that he may be mounting a third-party campaign. And he doesn't have to, he doesn't have to go out there and raise money. He can just wait for these Republican stooges and dunces to knock themselves off and for Mr. Obama to keep on just doing what he's doing, which is pretty much nothing. And then, we'll be in the spring or summer of 2012, and, Mr. Bloomberg may present himself as at a very interesting historical threshold moment. So we'll see how that works out.
All right, James Howard Kunstler, let me ask your thoughts, a bit of a thought experiment here for a second, because you mentioned how corporations have the rights of individuals in America. This is something that came out actually of the civil rights movements of the 50s, where there was a huge grab of power by corporate America. Is it related to the power given over to minorities in the U.S.? But let's go into a thought experiment here for a second. If corporations are in fact individuals, and in fact they're committing crimes commensurate with crimes that you see being committed in states like Texas, where individuals are given capital punishment, they're given the needle, isn't it therefore true that a corporation like a Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan that's committing crimes commensurate with other crimes that the state is giving capital punishment for, that these corporations and someone to represent these corporations should be given capital punishment for their crimes against capital? If they're individuals, shouldn't they also get capital punishment for similar crimes?
All you can really say about this is that there's been so much tension building up as a result of the failure to act in any way to discipline these banks and corporations. There's just so much tension building up that sooner or later, when it is released, it's liable to be very shocking and surprising. And, we're kind of heading into a situation that I think is going to resemble the French Revolution, only, instead of being directed against an aristocratic oligarchy, it'll be directed against a corporate oligarchy. And, it could be very ugly.
Look, let me cut in here for a second. Take somebody like, John Corzine, right? He's a former Goldman Sachs head. He becomes governor of New Jersey. He's also a hedge fund manager. Now he's missing $700 million, and he was commingling customer accounts with corporate accounts, which is a shocking transgression of all SEC laws for decades. Here's somebody who is clearly committing crimes against capital, that if in fact that company is an individual, then he should get capital punishment. That's only fair. Now, what's the argument against it? I don't get it. In other words, if you're black and you're in Texas and you're a kid, you get killed. But if you're a white guy in New Jersey and you steal nearly $1 billion, Obama gives you a pat on the head and a big fat wet kiss. What's going on here? There's two laws? I guess there's two sets of laws, isn't there? There's one set of laws for the 99%, and then for guys like John Corzine, the more crimes he commits, the greater benefits he gets and recognition from this administration, correct?
Well, look, when you don't enforce the law at all, you get all kinds of distortions and perversions. The fact is that we don't electrocute people or give them lethal injections for stealing money. You can put them in jail for 120 years and you can lock them away for a long time. What you're proposing is rather a Jacobin kind of solution to this, and that's precisely what I mean when I say that we're entering a kind of French Revolution type political atmosphere. The problem with Jacobin uprisings is they tend to get out of hand, and you set up the guillotine and you want to get rid of a few bad guys, and all of a sudden you're getting rid of everybody, and then everybody's getting rid of you. So these things can get out of hand, and that's why I think that we have to pay a lot of attention to what the rule of law actually means. And what it means in the case of the USA is we have a lot of laws that are on the books for prosecuting criminal misbehavior in banking and all kinds of things, and we're not really enforcing them. So I wouldn't want to apply the criminal codes for murder and arson and rape and child molestation, for crimes of stealing and robbery. Let me just cut in there. In France, actually, there is a movement to create a legal statute for financial pornography and financial rape.
to prosecute bankers in France, because they feel as though this is the only way they can grab the public's attention. There's a group of lawyers here that want to introduce the concept of financial rape and financial pornography for this very reason, that there needs to be a greater understanding in the public's mind of what guys like John Corzine and Blankfein and Jamie Dimon do on a daily basis. Now, before we go, tell us about your site that I've just got a note about, the Kunstler Cast book published this week. Tell us about that.
My podcast meister, Duncan Crary, published a book of transcripts of our conversations over the last 3 years. And it's being published by New Society Press. The book's in his name. He's the author, Duncan Crary, and it's called The Kunstler Cast.
All right. Well, we'll look for that. It's the Kunstler Cast book published this week. And there's a podcast that goes with it. James Howard Kunstler, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Okay, Max. Bye.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, James Howard Kunstler. If you want to follow us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report, or on Facebook at /Keiser Report, or email me at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.